We're back here on Science and Truth at the end of McCree. At the bottom of page 733, this page that has concerned us, we see the subject's division between truth and knowledge. And then we see this famous Freudian maxim here at the bottom of 733. Where it was, there I must come to be as a subject. Let's start first with this division between truth and knowledge. So far, we've been talking about the subject as divided or split between a bioanimalistic self and a sociolinguistic self. And this third element, this 1 + 1 = 3, this third element is the minimum irreducible distance between these two sides of yourself that allows them to remain distinct, yet related. Remember, the relationship between them is a differential one. They are not the same entities, but they do overlap in considerable ways. You might even think of drawing this with two overlapping circles to look something like this. They're not totally distinct, they overlap in this way, but there are gaps and lines of demarcation between them. You could also think of them as two hands pressed together. Here's your bioanimalistic self, here's your sociolinguistic self. They're smushed together in the form of a split subject. But they're in being smushed together, there's this third element, the crack or the split or the opening between them that always reminds you that they are at root two different hands. No matter how close you press them together, in fact, the closer you press them together, the more pronounced and identifiable that crack becomes. That gap, that minimum irreducible distance between the two hands that shows you that they are always, already, and irreducibly distinct. Here he gives us another way to approach the split subject. The split subject, he says, is always torn between knowledge and truth. Now, if we want to be a little sloppy about this, but not too inaccurate, we can say that on the side of sociolinguistic you, there is knowledge. And it is always conscious knowledge, knowledge of the ego. So you can stack this up as saying sociolinguistic self maps onto the field of knowledge, and it is always knowledge of an ego, of a moi, your sense of me, of who you are. You can know things about yourself. I know that I like to X. I know that I am a daughter or a son. I know. The ego has all of these things that it purports to know about itself. But what you know about yourself is different, according to Lacan, from the truth of what and who you are. What you know about yourself is different from the truth of what and who you are. Truth, on the other hand, if we're going to be, again, a little careless, but not too inaccurate here, truth is going to go not on the side of knowledge and sociolinguistics and the ego. Truth is going to go on the side of biomateriality, that part of you that is deeply embodied and usually covered up so that no one can see your holiest of holies, your private parts. The body is usually something, in other words, that is repressed, that is hidden away, highly constrained in its operations, be it sexual, be it bioanimalistic at the level of eating, shitting, sweating, burping, gurgling, whatever the noises that the body makes that embarrass our egos, you see. When you're sitting there in the quiet of the evening with your lover and you lean over to give them the sweetest kiss imaginable and you accidentally fart, that's an extremely uncomfortable situation. I mean, just imagining it, I'm sure, brings a smile to your face. Mine too. On this side of bioanimality, the same subject of pure need that we started as is active. but usually in a way that we don't like to think about, in a way that I've said is repressed. Things that are repressed go into this category of you known as the unconscious, this place where things go that we don't want to think about. So on the other side of the Lacanian subject, on the biomaterialistic side, there is not knowledge of yourself, but truth about who and what you are. And this truth is usually unconscious, except when it pops up in that lovely evening fart that you cut while leaning over to whisper into your lover's ear. Truth usually emerges, and I would say maybe even almost always emerges, as a rupture in the field of knowledge. It is a radical event that disrupts and calls into question the entire field of objectivity that you were operating in. Now, if you hear me hearkening back to the difference between modern science and Lacanian psychoanalysis, between the title of this essay, Science and Truth, now we're getting after it. This could very well be an essay titled Science versus Truth. Science is on the side of knowledge, hence its fetishization of objectivity. Psychoanalysis is on the side of truth, and not just the truth about who and what you are, but the truth about why you are who and what you are. The key question of science is what? The key question of psychoanalysis is why. Why is science this way? Why are we like this? It's a question, again, not of objectivity, but of objectality. The question of why is a question of cause, which is why throughout the second part of this essay, you hear Lacan saying truth as cause. As we flip through here, we arrive at another interesting passage on 742. After much discussion of truth as cause, it's everywhere in the intervening 10 pages. We get this statement at the bottom of 742. Science does not want to know anything about truth as cause. And then Lacan turns to some German terms. You may recognize therein my formulation of Verwerfung, or foreclosure, which forms a closed series with Verdrängung, repression, and Verneinung, negation, whose function in magic and religion I have indicated in passing. What I have said of the relationship between Verwerfung and psychosis, especially as Verwerfung of the name of the Father, is apparently at odds here with this attempt at structural situation. This foreclosure that marks the origin of a psychotic clinical structure, according to Lacan, is an important one. What it fundamentally forecloses is the name of the Father. Now, this is another wild Lacanian term that, again, is pretty simple. The name of the Father is also the know of the Father. And when Lacan says name of the Father, he knows this, because name in French sounds exactly the same as know in French. So when audience members hear him say name of the Father, they also hear the know of the Father. Now bracket for a minute the Father side of this, and let's just focus on the know. The know, thou shalt not, has the function of prohibition, and that is precisely what catalyzed the splitting of the subject of pure need into a bioanimalistic and sociolinguistic self, was a no, a prohibition issued by the primary caregiver. And it's a prohibition against living life as though the field of imminent present here and now were the only field in which you could live. The know of society, the know of the symbolic, the know of the Father, serves a prohibitive function. It prohibits any further living where you can just cry and expect to get your needs met. You now are always at a fork in the road. Are you going to allow your bioanimalistic self to rule the day and you're just going to cry whenever you're upset? Sometimes that's appropriate. But now you know that there's this other resource, language, that you have access to, where you can express your needs in language, issuing them not as cries or as needs, but as requests, namely demands. With every feeling that you have, you always are at that fork in the road. What will you choose? The name of the Father as the know of the Father, this prohibition, is a prohibition against any further movement through the world without any forks in the road. Every movement brings you to another fork in the road. It is a prohibition against living life with only one path in front of you. You now always can pursue the bio or the socio. And ideally, you've got them woven together somehow. But that's a decision, and it's hard work that has to be done by you in a way that an infant doesn't have to do. Science, in a way, forecloses, rules out this very important truth about human subjectivity. Science doesn't want to know anything about the truth as cause. It doesn't want to know anything about the prohibition that produces the split subject. There is no science of man, Lacan says in this essay, because there is only a subject of science. And that subject of science, like every other subject in the world, is a split subject. And the cause of that splitting is here, at the level of the name of the Father. When science obsesses, fetishizingly, you could say, about objects and objectivity, part of what they're doing in that moment is foreclosing, according to Lacan, foreclosing any interest in the cause of those objects, in the question of causality, and that's the field of truth. Now, when they foreclose that, it's tempting to say that that would go into the field of the unconscious. But if he's really serious about what he's doing here with foreclosure, it wouldn't be as simple as rendering causality unconscious. That's an important distinction to make here. The psychotic's relationship with the unconscious is very different, to the extent that it even has a relationship with the unconscious, than that of a neurotic person who has affirmed, negated, and repressed the basic prohibition atop which their split subjectivity is founded. Now, that's a conversation for another day, but if we take Lacan seriously here, what he's effectively saying is that science, if it has a clinical structure, is psychotic. Page 743. Continuing this conversation. If, moreover, one acknowledges that psychoanalysis is essentially what brings the name of the Father back into scientific examination, one comes upon the same apparent deadlock, but one has the feeling that this very deadlock spurs on progress, and that one can see the chiasmus that seem to create an obstacle therein coming undone. The important part about this is that when psychoanalysis enters the field of scientific inquiry, what it brings with it and allows scientific examination to focus upon is this name of the Father, which is the know of the Father, which is the cause of split subjectivity. The great contribution that psychoanalysis makes to science is its turn towards objectality, towards causality. Not the field of objects and stuff, but about the openings and the cuts and divisions and differential relations that allow for objects to appear as such, and thus to be studied by modern scientific minds. This opening, cut, differential relation that is designated with this little a Little a is how we speak about it. The name of the Father, this know of the Father, this prohibitive act that first opens up that gap, really cuts us one step closer to causality. Little a designates an opening that exists. The name of the Father marks the emergence of that opening. It's not the scar or the wound that you can point to, but the act of violence, if you will, that opened up that wound, that conditioned that scar to begin with. So here what Lacan is doing is he's starting with the split subject, showing how the little a is that third element that represents the gap between the biomaterialistic side of us and the sociolinguistic self. And then he's going one step further and saying that if little a names an existing irreducible distance between two entities that allows them to remain distinct, the name of the Father marks the emergence of that opening. It calls us back to a primordial act, a primordial prohibition, a thou shalt not, that first opened up the irreducible gap at the center of the human subject. That is what is at stake here. It's no coincidence that it's happening at the very end of this essay. The name of the Father is the know of the Father. And if indeed truth as cause is the primary line of inquiry that psychoanalysis brings to bear, this is it. The truth of the human subject is prohibition, is the know that constitutes, that opens it up as a split subject.